Hello everyone, and welcome to the second of our Scottish Opera special podcasts. And today I'm talking to Derek Clark, the head of music at Scottish Opera. Hello Derek.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you.
Well, first question I guess might be the most difficult one to do, but could you explain your role at Scottish Opera?
Yes, the head of music is is responsible for the music department, which consists of the repetiteurs who help the singers learn their music, the chorus master, the librarian who looks after the putting together of the vocal music and the orchestral music, and I also have one music administrator as well. So it's a small department, but it's at the hub of the company, because obviously learning the music is the most important thing. I also sit on the casting committee with the director of casting and the music director, and I'm also responsible for the production of the weekly call sheet or schedule, which I always say is like a bit like doing a jigsaw when you've lost the pattern on the box, because you don't actually know how it works until you've actually done it. But we get information about all the rehearsals that are to take place the following week, and we put it all on one sheet and check it through and add in coachings if there are singers who need coachings, or if there's any special events that have to be rehearsed and all that sort of thing. I also have a little bit of responsibility for the musical input of the emerging artists scheme. We have an emerging artist singers and emerging artist repetiteur, among other emerging artists, but those are the ones that I work mainly with. So I have to mentor them or help in mentoring them, and in general see that they have a nice time when they're with us.
Before we move on to what you've just said, the emerging artists, that's something that I've seen in the programmes and been aware of when I've come to the opera. So what exactly does that entail? Who decides that these people are emerging artists?
Well, we're very lucky in that we have a number of emerging artists across a lot of disciplines in the company, but we can have as many as we need. And so the idea started with an attempt to try and do something that would bridge the gap between people finishing postgraduate studies and actually coming into the profession. And so we can take a small number of singers, usually 3, sometimes 4, sometimes only 2, depending on what we need, and mentor them for a year or sometimes for 18 months, usually a year, and give them experience of doing various strands of our activity. Some of them may take part in the opera highlights programs. Yeah. Some of them may sing smaller roles with the main company. We devise a program for each individual singer based on what we can give them in any given season. For instance, a hypothetical example, if we were doing a lot of Wagner or big things, then we might not have so many emerging artists, because there aren't the same opportunities for beginning singers in those pieces. So it depends on our repertoire as to how many singers we take. And we also have an emerging artist repetiteur who becomes a member of our music staff and does the same thing as the main repetiteurs do, maybe slightly more supervised and mentored, but it's a sort of apprenticeship, if you like. That's what the scheme was devised to do, and it seems to be quite successful.
You said when you were explaining your role that learning the music is the most important part, and I think that'll be interesting when I speak to different people, how many people say that their role is the most important.
Yes.
But what's interesting to me is it's clear that something the size of Scottish Opera is a huge collaboration. So where does the head of music and your department kind of fit into that collaboration?
We're very much involved in the rehearsal process, because the singers' contracts state that they come knowing their role, unlike actors who sort of learn it as they go along.
That's fascinating.
Because the music has to be secure before we start the production. So every opera starts with 2 or 3 days of just music when the singers get together, and we sort of work with the conductor and find out basically how the music's going to go in that piece. And then the music department then swings into action, and if the opera is in a foreign language, we also have a language coach who will come and work with the singers and be present at all the rehearsals, just advising on dotting I's and crossing T's linguistically. The repetiteurs will play for the production rehearsals and the music rehearsals what the orchestra will eventually play. The orchestra will rehearse separately and then put together towards the end of the rehearsal process. And then the music staff, their role changes from playing to listening and note-taking, and we would normally sit behind the conductor when we move into the theatre and make a note of things that aren't quite right, so that we can go to the singers and give them notes and make sure that what they're doing is what we rehearsed.
So do singers come with a repertoire that they already have, a kind of knowledge of certain parts that they already have?
Yes, sometimes that does happen. Singers will come, especially if they've done a role previously with another company, they will come with the experience of that role, and sometimes they are more or less willing to change what they do, because every singer has to find his or her own way through the role that they're doing, and that's something that it's sometimes quite difficult to interfere with.
Yes.
And so you have to respect what they've already discovered about the role in question, but at the same time, the conductor and more likely the director will have their own views of how the opera is going to go, and so we're sometimes a bit like piggy in the middle, and we're trying to sort of broker a way of looking at it that it takes account of what they've already learned about the role, but may be able to shed some new light on it in a way. So it's very interesting.
So you're kind of almost not a go-between, but trying to say, well, I appreciate what you are trying to do, but then trying to also
bring in what the director. Most singers are very good at adapting what they need to do to the needs of different conductors and different directors, and so it's usually it's a very amicable process. Just occasionally there are sometimes resistances, but then that's what makes life interesting.
So how did you come to this role? What's your background before you
It's a good question. I didn't set out to do this. It sort of evolved. When I went to music college, I kind of thought that what I would do is do my 3 years and then do a year at Jordan Hill Training College and be a music teacher in the school, because I kind of thought that that's what you did if you were going to do music as a career. But when I was at college, I had always been more interested in playing the piano for other musicians rather than playing on my own.
Sure.
So I did quite a lot of accompanying singing lessons, and I started playing for the opera class, as it then was. And a chap called David Kelly, who was at the time was the head of vocal studies at the RSAMD, suggested that maybe this was something that I could consider, because he seemed to think I was quite good at it. And so I went to the London Opera Centre, as it then was, now the National Opera Studio, and did a postgraduate course for repetiteurs, with a view to becoming a repetiteur, and I was lucky enough to get a job in Wales with Welsh National Opera as a repetiteur, and I'd begun at college to be a little bit interested in conducting.
Right.
So when I went to Wales, after a few seasons, I was given an opportunity to do some conducting, and so the two things have sort of gone in parallel since then. But as I say, I didn't start out with the idea that I'm going to work in an opera company.
So when you went to college originally, what kind of music did you think? Was it just a general grounding that you thought you might have?
Yes, I mean, I did a course that doesn't exist now, which was a course designed for people who wanted to be music teachers in school.
Okay.
So my first study was piano, and I had to do singing as a second study. I mean, I was a hopeless singer, really, but I enjoyed it, and it's been quite useful because it does give you an understanding of how singers work.
Yeah.
But the job of a music staff member, a repetiteur, or if you're working with singers, anyone who's doing that, it's a fine line, because our job is not to tell the singers how to sing technically. Our job is to advise on the way they might sing, interpretatively, if that's a word, so that we get the most out of the text and the music. I don't see it as my job or the job of the music staff to deal with technical issues.
Right.
And if there are, then that's a job for a singing teacher. It's not a job for a coach, I don't think.
So almost like a directing role.
Well, yes. I mean, the singer hopefully comes with their technique sorted out, and it's then put at the service of the music. And we can cultivate that by saying, have you considered singing this line in this way? Or perhaps there's a piano marking here that you can find a dramatic reason for doing piano rather than just singing it straight. Our job is to bring the music off the page.
Yes. And is that because you can see, the direction of a production as a whole in terms of things like tone, or I can imagine that different classical operas are interpreted in many different ways.
Yes, indeed. And I think you have to be open to the particular tone of a production.
Yeah.
But our basic grounding is what is in the score.
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone is working towards a realization of that. So our work is to see that the markings in the score are respected and are there in the final thing that the audience sees. So that can involve a lot of work, or it can involve relatively little work, depending on how prepared the singers are and how well they've absorbed what is already there.
So I'm thinking if things are, perhaps there's a little bit of comedy in something, but there's also tragedy. But whose decision is it to go a certain way with?
Well, I suppose it's the director's decision in that he will have a view that he wants to take of the piece. It's our job, in consultation with the conductor, to make sure that vision is realised in as close a way
to the original,
to the given material. And we don't really know what original productions of Mozart operas, for instance, or Handel operas were like.
Of course,
but we know what the ground rules were, and we know the ground rules for the music. So we try and make sure that they get observed.
Well, I guess that brings on to the question about the difference between doing something traditional and the more contemporary, because Scottish opera, I think, strikes a really good balance between you dealing with your well-known pieces and dealing with the more modern as well. What different challenges does that bring?
Well, the modern ones have very often musical challenges because they're much more of an unknown quantity. But the good thing is that you can actually get in touch with the composer and ask him what he meant. And it's been really nice over the past few years to work with people like Stuart McRae and James McMillan on their pieces and be able to actually go to them and say, is this what you meant? Not in a critical way, but to make sure that we're doing what they want and that the music is coming out the way they imagine it.
Yeah, I think I can see that there's pros and cons to both. Someone can say, well, that's not how I did imagine it, whereas obviously, Mozart's not going to...
Yes.
See, you've got me all wrong.
But if you're dealing with people like Stuart McRae and James McMillan, they have a very clear idea of what they imagine, and they also provide very, very detailed scores, so that really your job as conductor or as someone who's assisting in the production of a contemporary opera, your job is literally to bring it off the page into life, and most of the instructions are already there for you.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different from doing a Mozart opera or a Handel opera, where the basic material has a lot less in it.
Yes.
There are all those movements in Handel pieces where he marks a tempo ordinario at an ordinary tempo. Well, what's an ordinary tempo? How fast is it? And all that thing. Whereas there are far less artistic decisions to be made in contemporary music, because the composer has made most of them for you, and all you have to do is respect those.
And I suppose those sort of collaborations with people. Is that exciting to do, or do you feel
Of course,
that?
Yes. I mean, it's wonderful when a new score lands on your desk and nobody knows what it is, and if you have a chance to have some input into bringing it to life, that's a very exciting prospect. I mean, we've just this season done Anthropocene, the new Stuart McRae piece, and that was great fun. It was very difficult, and yes, there are challenges that are perhaps different from the challenges that you find in Mozart or a Puccini opera, but it's something very rewarding about bringing a new piece into the world. And if Scottish opera doesn't play its part in doing that, then there are very few other organisations in the country that are going to do that. So we need to do that.
And what about more contemporary pieces where the conductor or the director isn't involved? The composer is the word I'm looking for. Isn't involved. Something like Philip Glass or something who's still contemporary, but it's not as easy to.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's the same principle really applies. I mean, we did Philip Glass's The Trial last season, which I conducted, and I was able to get a little bit of information slightly second-hand through Michael McCarthy, who was the director, who himself had been in touch with Philip Glass. So I got some advice, but again, the things that are in the score are enough to give you the guidelines, and then you have to. There are relatively few places where you think, well, I wonder whether he meant this or this, and then you just have to make a decision that seems the right one for you.
And you mentioned at the beginning the role of a librarian. Mm-hmm. So is there, is everything archived in that sense? Scores and notes?
Yes. I mean, we have a vast collection of orchestral material for all the major operas. Wherever we can, we buy the orchestral material, and that becomes ours because it can be marked up with the way that our conductors want to do it. Whereas if you're hiring material, you have to rub it all out and send it back, basically. So we try and buy material wherever we can. When we can't, we have very good arrangements with a lot of the major publishers who will reserve a set of materials solely for our use, so that every time we want to do a particular opera, we get the same material back. But the work of the librarian is much more than just stamping out books.
Sure.
In fact, that's a very small part of it, because he and his team need to prepare all the orchestral material, see that in the string parts all the bowing markings are inserted so that everybody's doing the same bowing and all that thing, and lots of sort of behind the scenes work. So that's quite a large part of the operation.
It makes me think, when you're watching the opera, you have often the singers on stage and obviously the orchestra in the orchestra pit. What, in terms of rehearsal, is the relationship there? How does that work?
Well, as I said to begin with, the singers rehearse first.
Yes.
And rehearse with piano.
Yeah.
For maybe 3 or 4 weeks until the actual blocking, the moves of the staging are worked out and cemented, and then the orchestra will have their own rehearsals, and then we bring the singers and the orchestra together in rehearsals which are called Sitzproben, literally seated rehearsals, and the singers will just stand with music stands at those rehearsals and sing, because very often that's the first time that the singers and the orchestra will meet.
Yeah.
And then after the Sitzproben, the whole thing moves into the theatre, and we will have a series of rehearsals, generally one for each act of an opera, again just with piano, and at that point we will bring in lighting and costume and all that sort of thing, and again a series of rehearsals, one for each act with orchestra, and then 2 dress rehearsals.
Yeah, because it just struck me, I hadn't thought about it before, but you couldn't get that amount of people together early on. It has to be done in that separate sense, and then
the only time we've done something like that is when we were doing the 5:15, the contemporary little pieces, and also we did it for Anthropocene. We had a couple of sessions, learning sessions for the orchestra, and then we brought some singers in at that point very early on in the proceedings, basically because with a lot of contemporary opera, the textures with orchestra are obviously very different from the textures just with piano, and it's quite good to let the singers have a listen to that sort of thing at quite an early stage in the proceedings, so they know eventually what they're not competing against, but what the orchestral texture sounds like. Because if you're only doing it with piano and then you suddenly bring in the orchestra, it's quite different. And if you don't, if it's a brand new piece and you can't go away and listen to a recording of it to see what the orchestra sound like, it could be quite a shock to suddenly be having, because you get used to rehearsing with piano and you get used to the person who plays and what they do, and then suddenly it's different with the orchestra. So we try and introduce that at an earlier stage in a contemporary piece, even though the orchestra won't necessarily be a finished thing, because they will still have work to do.
And when do you get to see a season's programme?
Well, as head of music, I'm involved with the music director and in the planning of a season, so I get to see the plan at quite an early stage, and I also get to see how it evolves, and very often what we end up with isn't quite what we started, because there are all sorts of diversions that the season can take before it actually gets into the season brochure. But that's part of the job, and that's a nice part, because you can start off with blue sky thinking, I think is the current term. Where it would be nice to do this, and this, and this, and then of course you do the sums and say, well, maybe that's not quite such a good idea. But that's a very interesting part of the thing, because actually being in and having a hand in the production of a whole season, which is nice.
And you may not be able to answer this, but do you have highlights of the coming season that you would say that I'm really excited to be doing that?
I'm excited about the whole season next year. I mean, personally, I'm very excited to be working on the G&S pieces, because they're pieces that I love, and it's a good opportunity for an opera company to do a piece like that. But I mean, the rest of the season, Tosca is a fantastic piece. I mean, it's one of my desert island operas. So that's a wonderful piece and a wonderful production, which is part of Scottish opera's history. So it's nice to have that again. Nixon in China is also a marvellous piece, and although I personally won't do a lot of work on that piece, it's wonderful that we're doing it, so I'm looking forward to doing that. And Midsummer Night's Dream also is a piece that hasn't been in our repertoire for some time, so it's a very exciting season. So I'm very lucky in that I get a chance to be enthusiastic about all these things, and it's very easy. I don't have to feign enthusiasm for any of these pieces, because they're all wonderful works, and I think if we are enthusiastic about the pieces that we're doing, hopefully that will come across.
And when you first got interested in music, right, years ago, was opera an interest of yours? Is that something you've grown into through?
I have to say no, it wasn't. Not because I didn't think I liked it, but because there were comparatively few chances to be involved in it. I mean, when I went to the Opera Centre, I remember thinking that everybody else there seemed to know far more about opera than I did, because I had only done at that point maybe 3 complete operas, one of which was The Marriage of Figaro, which was a really useful piece to have done.
Right.
But the other piece was Aaron Copland's Tender Land, which I have never worked on since. We did it as a student production at the Academy of Music, as it then was. I mean, it is a lovely piece and it has nice music in it, but it wasn't a terribly useful piece to have under your belt, in that I've never... I should have said at the beginning, part of my brief is also to compile the programmes for the Opera Highlights production, and I have used an extract from the Tender Land a couple of times as one of those. But there were lots of operas that I had never seen or knew very little about. So it was quite a steep learning curve, but I think that's all right. And there are always going to be, even now I've been in the opera world for the best part of 40 years, and there are operas that I have never worked on just because they haven't come up. And there are always going to be pieces like that, but everybody has different gaps. So between us all, we can cover most of the bases.
And I suppose that's one of the things that makes it exciting, is that you've got brand new things to work on, but there's also ones which you know well.
Yes, and also one of the things that I find particularly fascinating is that every time you come back to a piece that you've done before, sometimes a piece that you've done a lot, there are always new things that strike you. So you can never really say that you know you've finished learning a piece, because there are always new things, and different casts, different conductors, different directors will bring different things to it. Which is why we do it.
Well, Derek, I think that's the perfect place to finish, so thank you very much for talking to us.
Not at all. My pleasure.
And we'll be back next time with someone else from Scottish Opera. Cheers.